Considering the results of the weekend for the BYU basketball program, there is a compelling case to be made that BYU basketball boasts the best starting five in the entire country.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console required. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more now. All right, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about a strong weekend for BYU basketball and why indeed they may have the best starting five in the entire country. We'll also talk about the close of the transfer portal windows for both basketball and also football and what remaining needs both programs have. And then we'll finish up on the football front. 8 former Cougars from Kalani Sitake's program getting professional opportunities. Is it enough? We'll talk about that all ahead on today's podcast. All right, so let's start off talking BYU basketball. Now, some great news came out on Saturday. Richie Saunders officially announced he's running it back for year 4 with the BYU Cougars, and it was something that was expected, but it is absolutely awesome to see Richie back in a Cougar uniform for another year. He went through a pretty extensive process, if you talk to people around him, about his evaluation of himself, critiquing his game, obviously getting feedback from the NBA and its personnel about where he might fit at the professional level. He did everything outside of formally announced he was entering the NBA draft without hiring an agent, which would have allowed him to do what he did and ultimately return to BYU. But at the same time, he comes back as the most improved player in the Big 12 from this past season. He's a first-team all-conference honoree, and I would bet bottom dollar he ends up as a preseason first-team all-conference player. He is that good of a player for BYU, and more importantly in the Big 12, that you can expect there'll be some very, very strong accolades coming his way. His return cannot be overstated how important it is to BYU's hopes of making a run this year. You add him, and then we found out also over the weekend that they got a big commitment out of Southern Illinois, a Kennard Davis Jr., who I expect will be BYU's third wing player. I'm in this day and age of basketball, trying to essentially slot guys 1 through 5 in a basketball lineup is a foolhardy notion. Yes, we all know that Robert Wright III is going to be BYU's point guard and primary ball handler. That's very clear. At the 5 spot at the center, guess what? You can put Keba Keita in there, but then essentially spots 2 through 4, the traditional shooting guard, small forward, and power forward positions, you can insert Richie Saunders, AJ Dybantsa, and Kennard Davis Jr. in any order you want in many respects, and you're not going to be wrong. I would expect if you want to formally lay out BYU's lineup, it probably ends up with Kennard Davis Jr. being the 2-man, then you put Richie Saunders at the 3, and then AJ Dybantsa at the 4. But that 5-man lineup, look at it on paper and tell me that there is a better starting 5 in the entire country. I'll wait, because right now, I don't see it. Yes, Houston's going to be very strong. Duke, the who's who of college basketball will have very strong lineups. But I'm telling you, look at the lineup BYU will be able to put on the court, especially in that starting 5, and tell me it does not stack up against literally anybody else in this entire country. BYU's strength last year was more in its depth than I think its star players. Yes, Richie Saunders was phenomenal. You had big game after big game from him all year long. You had other guys who stepped up in big circumstances as well. But the star power for BYU in many respects was lacking. This year, the star power won't be lacking, but you need to find the depth to round out this roster. At last count, I have BYU with 11 guys, and pending the outcome of the House settlement, there could be as many as 17 roster slots or as little as 15 roster slots. There's between 4 and 6 roster slots still open for BYU, and Kevin Young and company will do a good job filling those. But I'm telling you, at the top end, the 5 guys that BYU has that I project as their starters, I'm not the only one. I'd be very blunt about that. It's kind of easy to put those guys and say, that's your starting 5. I think it stacks up literally with anybody in the entire country. And the capability and the versatility of that lineup is also a major strength. As I mentioned, you can put Davis, Saunders, and Dybantsa in any order you want on the wing. And the nice part is all three of them and their ability to draw opponents to them, particularly the star power of Saunders, and obviously with AJ Dybantsa with the just the spotlight that'll be cast upon him as one of the top-rated prospects in this recruiting cycle, projected to be the #1 overall pick in next year's NBA draft. There is going to be a lot of versatility with those three guys interchanging. And the nice part is the pick and roll with Robert Wright III and Keba Keita. It can't be understated how important and how critical of a thing that will be for BYU's offense. The lob threat, the ability for Robert Wright III to get to the rim, draw the defense to him, and kick it out on the wing to a Dybantsa or a Saunders or a Davis. The versatility of that lineup is going to be very, very strong. Now, some of you are going to be flying back at me saying, well, Jake, look at their overall size. They're going to be a little bit lacking in the size department. Okay, you can argue that. I know that Keba Keita is listed at 6'9", same with AJ Dybantsa. So those are your two tallest guys on the court. And yes, Robert Wright III is listed at 6'1", but I don't think that they're going to be at a size disadvantage due to the fact that I think they have very, very good athleticism. I talked with a couple of people over the weekend who know far more about basketball and said, hey, what do you know about Kennard Davis Jr.? And they said, and a couple of them watched the podcast, and they said, what you talked about on the podcast, his uptick and what he produced at Southern Illinois in the Missouri Valley Conference. Yes, the offensive output is very, very good, but they also said the defensive end of the court is where he is going to be even more critical than BYU is, I think, giving him credit for. At 6'6", 215 pounds, he's a walking mismatch both offensively and defensively. He's got enough length and athleticism to hang with anybody on the perimeter, but also has the size of a guy decides who's maybe 6'8" or 6'9" that wants to think they can back him down in the paint. He's got the ability and the size needed to defend his position more than adequately. And that's something that BYU lacked last year. At times, BYU's inability to get over on screens killed them. I don't think I have to point any further than what happened against Alabama in the NCAA tournament. BYU repeatedly went underneath screens because they simply could not either would not or could not get across the face of those screens and stay with a guy, and it absolutely crippled their opportunities in that game. I think the versatility and, more importantly, the upgrade in positional across the board athleticism should allow BYU to defend far better, even though they may be at a little more of a size disadvantage this year. I look at the bench also for BYU, and it's right now it's got a lot of nice versatile options on it. I think guys like Mihailo Boskovic coming back for a second year in the system, Brody Kozlowski coming off an injury-marred freshman campaign, etc., all of them will have a role to play. And the biggest thing they can do in this circumstance right now is they start to get ready for off-season conditioning, workouts, and I think later on this summer they'll also have the on-court work with coaches as well, is to prove that their versatility is not going to slow down anything with the second unit. But going back to the original premise of this conversation, this starting five for BYU is going to be absolutely lights out. I, for one, cannot wait to see them take the court. Preseason starts in October. The first games will be tipping off that first full week in November. And get ready for a really, really fun basketball season. There's going to be a major spotlight cast upon BYU, and the recruiting rankings back up all that I've been talking about. BYU right now, according to 24/7 Sports, has the second best recruiting class in the entire country outside of conference foe Houston. BYU is absolutely killing it on so many different fronts. And the nice part is, as I mentioned, there are still multiple roster slots for BYU to fill, whether they are guys that come out of the transfer portal. They're still waiting on a couple of decisions for different players out there. Dominic Harris among them, the one-time Gonzaga, then LMU, and most recently UCLA guard. He could fit into that, what I call the Dallin Hall role, and be the kind of that backup point guard, but also capable of playing off ball and being a secondary ball handler. I think it'd be a nice thing to have on the roster. But even if they look to the transfer portal or they look overseas to the international market, whether it's in Europe, Africa, or literally anywhere else on this globe, I think that Kevin Young has proven that he is more than capable of stocking this roster full of options. And more importantly, he's put together top-tier talent that could help BYU absolutely climb to the top of the heap in the Big 12 and maybe, just maybe, the NCAA. All right, coming up next, we'll talk about the transfer portal. BYU basketball and football know that the portal is closed. So the players that are in the program right now, they have not defected anywhere. But what does BYU overall, both football and basketball, still need to add in the transfer portal to bolster these lineups? We'll delve into that next as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, my friends, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Obviously, all of us want to have fun when it comes to watching the sports we're interested in, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, they have so many different ways to bet on your favorite player props. And also, you can bet on your favorite teams as a whole as well. And after the game tips off, you can combine those live prop bets into a same-game parlay for an even bigger chance to win big as well. Don't miss out on the action. Head to FanDuel.com right now and claim that $250 in bonus bets today with that first $5 bet. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Post District, one of our great local sponsors. They are home to four of Salt Lake's newest and most stylish apartment buildings, the Register, Post House North, Post House South, and 801 Flats. Each one of these residences offers its own unique take on luxury urban living with features like waterfall kitchen islands, floor-to-ceiling windows, vaulted ceilings, spacious patios, and walk-in closets. Enjoy premium amenities in the community, including the city's largest residential gym, a year-round pool, golf simulator, massive TV wall for sports watch parties or the like, and more, all anchored in a one-of-a-kind community. Step outside and immerse yourself in Salt Lake's hottest dining and nightlife scene. They got award-winning spots just steps away like Urban Hill, Men's Show Ramen, Level Crossing, and Sunday's Best. So check it out, my friends, whether you're looking for a studio, a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom, or even a penthouse. Find your perfect home today. Visit liveatpost.com or call 801-590-6247. Mention Locked On Cougars in this ad for an exclusive incentive from our friends at Post District, But once again, visit liveatpost.com or call them 801-590-6247. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all having a fantastic Monday. Hope you had a great weekend out there. All right, so the transfer portal windows have now closed. It was midweek last week for the basketball programs out there, and then Friday night, the football spring window closed. Now, BYU saw a handful of guys leave both programs. I think the most notable ones would include Keelan Marion, who we found out over the weekend is now committed to Miami. So you wish Keelan nothing but the best. Also, defensive tackle Josh Singh announced he's entering the transfer portal. He made a couple of visits. I think he went to Nashville to visit Vanderbilt, among others. We also have seen that Harrison Taggart from the football program. He was visiting Cal over the weekend, speaking of the Cal Bears, now of the ACC, which is still so weird to say that they're not in the Pac-12, but they play in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But welcome to conference realignment in a nutshell. The bigger point is that BYU has seen their fair share of guys leave the program, but it was not a mass exodus. That being said, there are still needs, and I'm talking football here for a moment. We'll talk about basketball momentarily. There are still needs, I think, for BYU to go out in the portal and find, if at all possible. I think the number one spot I would be looking at if I was at BYU right now is defensive tackle. Yes, Keanu Tanavasa looks like he is going to be an absolute stud for BYU along the interior of that defensive line. They also brought in guys like Anisi Purcell via the transfer portal out of Southern Utah. But I think they simply put, they want to find more depth at the defensive tackle position. And I think guys out there in the portal could offer that. The biggest thing will be is finding guys who fit BYU's playing style. That is a big thing. And it seems like more and more we just think, hey, get a guy in here. And that, I know that mentality can be both helpful, but in many respects also can hurt you as you try and find the right options for your program. I trust that Jay Hill and Sione Puha, who is BYU's defensive tackles coach, along with guys like Gary Anderson, they're going to be meticulous in looking at all their options and finding the right guy or guys to bring in. I think they could bring in 1 or 2 defensive tackles, and they very well may not be household names at the outset, but by the end of the season, they could become just that. That is the opportunity that exists there. I also think that BYU needs to look at cornerback. I like what Evan Johnson brings to the table. I like what Maury Bamba brings. I also like some of the young guys in that room. I look at guys like Trey Alexander, Jonathan Cabea, Marcus McKenzie. But there is not a proven number one guy in that room that I would scream, that's your lockdown corner. Can they find that guy on the open market right now? TBD. But I think at minimum, you need to go out and find a cornerback that can come in and at least provide competitive depth for BYU. Yes, Maury Bamba may finally emerge into his own. Maybe Evan Johnson takes the leap and becomes that lockdown corner. But you still need to add at least a body, it feels like, to maybe make up at least a 6-man rotation among the 5 guys I've already mentioned, as well as this undetermined player out there maybe in the market. Also on offense, if you were looking for BYU offensively, wide receiver, yeah, I'd probably look at a wide receiver in the absence of Keelan Marion. Now, the good news was there were strong rumors, and I wasn't the only one who heard him, that JoJo Phillips may have ultimately decided to hit the transfer portal last week. Well, as of recording of this podcast, his name never popped up in the portal, meaning that I think he looked at the Keelan Marion exit and said, hey, that opens an opportunity for myself. I would project today that JoJo Phillips probably is going to be the starter opposite a guy like Chase Roberts at either the X or the Z position, and at the H or the slot receiver position, you probably pencil in Parker Kingston. Beyond that, you have guys like Tei Nakua. You also have a guy like Dominique McKenzie and Cody Hagan. They're all guys who are chomping at the bit to go out and show what they're capable of. But I still feel like a wide receiver could be something that BYU looks at. And the good news is, based on what the portal projects right now, you look at the different names out there, there's a lot of wide receiver options out there. Fesi Satake, he's not going to, like I said, take just any simple guy just to take a guy, but they will find the right options for them. And I think they'll be very smart about how they go about making sure that they both don't upset the apple cart, because you got a lot of guys in that room already who, like I said, are very competitive and want nothing more than to go out there and prove their mettle. But I think the bigger thing is you don't bring a guy in that is going to cause the room to fall apart at the same time. Now, that's a very tight line to walk and to obviously make sure you get it right. But I think the bigger point is BYU knows what they're looking for in the portal. The final position I would be looking at if I was BYU is the offensive line. Now, I'm not saying they need an offensive tackle or an interior offensive lineman. I'm just looking for more depth. And I know that TJ Woods, he is a very, very good coach, and he's got a lot of guys on his roster already at that offensive line spot. But those are the best 5 guys that you need out there at any given time. And let's be honest, you have to find the right combination of those guys. And maybe there's a guy out there in the portal that TJ looks at and says, hey, that guy would fit exactly what I'm looking for, whether it's at a tackle position along the interior or simply just the best guy that is versatile all along that offensive front, and they can come in and make an imprint. It's a dog world out there. And the transfer portal obviously are guys who some have labeled them as mercenaries and guys who are just out for money. Not all of them are doing that. I think we get a misnomer that when we hit the portal, oh, that guy's just looking for money. A lot of guys out there are told, hey, you need to hit the transfer portal. There are other guys, yes, they're looking for money, but there are a lot of guys out there as well who are just simply looking for a home and a chance to play. And the tough part is kind of weeding out which is which, because sometimes you don't necessarily know the full circumstances behind certain guys' exits. But I do think BYU football has done a really good job making sure that guys are coming to BYU for the right reasons. Yes, NIL is a big part of it. And yes, BYU has got money to pay. That is absolutely true. But at the same time, Kalani Sitake has endeavored to make this program more about finding the right combination of personality, but also guys who are going to come in and fit in with the collective whole. We're going to talk in a moment about 8 former Cougars who got professional opportunities, not a one of an NFL draft pick. That's pretty remarkable for a team that went 11-2, and we'll dig into that momentarily. But that is the thing about this. The sum total of the parts for BYU football are more important in many respects than the individual, and that's been proven on the field already. Now, quickly on basketball, I didn't mean to spend this entire part of the podcast on football, but in the basketball front, yes, you need a backup point guard, whether that's Dominic Harris, because I still hear that he is very much in the mix with BYU, or you go out there and find another guard. You need to find a secondary ball handler for BYU. Yes, Richie Saunders. Yes, AJ Dybantsa. Even a guy like Kennard Davis Jr. have shown that they can initiate offense from their time at whatever level of basketball they've been at. But you need to have guys who are comfortable with the ball in their hands and capable of initiating the offense, and more importantly, setting up their teammates. You need to find a backup point guard. I still believe you need to still find front court depth. You need to find what I believe is a true big man, a true 7-footer. Xavier Staten may impress us all, but everything I've heard about Xavier is he may need a year to ultimately become the force that BYU believes he can become with his back to the basket. So you may find yourself on either the European or international market looking for a big man, or you may be looking in the transfer portal just to find a guy out there who's capable of defending the rim. They may not be the most fluid offensive option. But if you can find a guy out there who's capable of defending the rim, that's good enough for that second unit for BYU in many respects. Any scoring they provide beyond that is great, but a rim protector outside of a backup point guard, those are my two biggest things that I think BYU needs to find in the transfer portal for basketball. And then beyond that, if I'm Kevin Young, it's at that point, I think you're going best players available, whether they're wing, guard, or big men. Just find the best guys beyond that. But those are the two critical things that I'm looking at right now. And I'm an armchair analyst. I'm very clear about that, but I do think that BYU's on a good track, both football and basketball. Essentially everything I've talked about here are guys who would come in and add versus being a major need. There's not a major hole in either one of these lineups in many respects. It's just finding guys who can come in and provide competitive depth that will make BYU better, both football and basketball wise. And it's a good spot to be in if you're a BYU Cougar fan, administrator, coach, or even a player in these programs, understanding that we've got a strong thing here. How much stronger can we make it along the way? All right, we'll finish up today's show. Coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about the NFL draft outcomes. Yes, 8 former Cougars got professional opportunities. That's great. But does BYU really need to have more guys who hear their names called in the NFL draft? Is that something that is lacking for Kalani Sitake? We'll delve into that next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. I'm not going to lie. I've been watching the NBA playoffs and not having the Utah Jazz and those playoff atmospheres, I'm missing it. But every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's absolutely electric in the arenas. And with Game Time, you can be a part of it without the stress of finding your last-minute tickets out there. The best part is Game Time makes it fast and easy to get your playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and the last-minute deals can save you up to 60% off. That's incredible, my friends. The best part is the all-in pricing feature means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see in the app is what you're going to pay. They're not tallying a whole bunch of things on the back end that make you think, wow, I thought I had a good deal. No, you know exactly what you're paying right up front. But the best part is you can take your guesswork out of buying your tickets with our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, and of course, it's all guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing well out there. Make sure you join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports that I'm hearing every single day. And the best part is you get 2 full weeks of a free trial before you're charged a single penny. It's just $5 a month beyond that to be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. But I encourage you guys, if you're interested, to join today. The link is in the show notes below, or reach out to us and we'll get you squared away. All right, before we go on today's show, let's talk about BYU football and the outcomes of the NFL draft. Now, for the first time since I believe 2021, BYU did not have a player hear their name called in the draft. And that was a bit of a bummer because I expected guys like a Caleb Etienne or a Tyler Batty to be picked in that 6th or 7th round range. It really felt like those two guys deserved that. But following the draft, 8 former Cougars got opportunities in the professional ranks. Tyler Batty signed a free agent deal with the Minnesota Vikings. Blake Mangelson is also going to Minnesota, but he is going to a mini camp invite, the rookie mini camps. They're like a 3-day camp, and I think it's either this weekend or next weekend. You go out there and show what you're capable of and see if you get picked up there. Then you also saw Jacob Robinson get a deal with my San Francisco 49ers. So, hey, J-Rob, do me proud and show out with the Niners. And then Mark Collins, also a cornerback for BYU, is going to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as a free agent signing in the CFL. So he is the one that's not linked up with an NFL team. He's actually headed north of the border to play in the Canadian Football League. So congratulations to him. Now, those are the defensive players. Once again, Batty and Mangelson to Minnesota, Jacob Robinson to San Francisco, and Mark Collins to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. On offense, Caleb Etienne inked a deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. Then Braden Keim, who received honorable mention all Big 12 honors, is a minicamp invite to both the Kansas City Chiefs and the Chicago Bears. He'll have 2 opportunities to go out there and show what he's capable of. Then Connor Pay is going to Las Vegas, our good friend Connor. He'll be there with the Raiders for a minicamp invite there. And then Darius Lassiter, he is going to go to a minicamp with the Philadelphia Eagles. So if you're tallying it at home, it's 3 free agent deals, 4 minicamp invites, and 1 CFL free agent deal. All 8 of these guys, I hope, make good on the opportunity they have in front of them, especially a guy like Connor Pay. He has been so good to this podcast, and I'll be rooting him on no matter where he plays, when he plays, or who he plays for. But the nice part is all these guys getting that opportunity, but it was still a raw deal to not see them have their name called in the NFL draft. And there's a myriad of reasons that you could point to. Guys like Tyler Batty and Connor Pay are guys who served missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they're 24, 25, 26 years old when they enter their name into the draft. And in many respects, the guys they're going up against in that draft class are 21, 22, in some cases even just 20 years old. So there are NFL franchises who look at it and say, okay, their floor may be a little bit higher than the player who's younger than them, but the ceiling is also closer for a player of that caliber, speaking of a 24, 25, or a 26-year-old. That is why I think some of those guys get knocked down. In the case of Caleb Etienne, yeah, he had freakish athleticism, and I hope he kills it out there with Cincinnati, because it'd be awesome to see him go out there and make good. But I think that there's a question of which Caleb Etienne are you getting? Is it the 2023 version that barely could see the field and in many respects probably shouldn't have been playing? Or is he the 2024 guy who was an all Big 12 honoree? That's the bet that Cincinnati's trying to figure out for themselves. And I think that question mark lingered in the minds of NFL personnel when it came to naming these guys, or not naming these guys, having these guys drafted by his respective franchises. I also will make a bold prediction right now, though. Next year, BYU is not going to go over in the NFL draft. There is too much talent, most notably guys like Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker, among others, to have BYU aced out in the NFL draft process next year. There's just too many bodies out there. I think offensive tackle, you have guys like Isaiah Jota. They also look at a guy opposite him like Andrew Gentry. They'll be looking to make a good impression. Waylon Lapuaho on the inside of interior BYU's offensive line. He wants to go out and show things. Chase Roberts, yeah, he's a little bit older, like a Connor Pay and a Tyler Batty, but can he put together enough production that has NFL teams overlooking the fact that, yes, he'll be 24, 25 years old by the time he's a rookie at the NFL level? I like what BYU has done, because even without NFL draft picks, they have proven that they are an elite team out there. And I said it earlier on the podcast, and I'll reiterate it here. BYU is a sum total of the parts versus relying on true star power to lift them. They went 11-2 last year and did not have a single NFL draft pick. They're one of just 5 Power 4 programs out there who didn't have a draft pick last year. But I would say of those 5, they're by far the most successful. And that can be good or bad because there's a lot of returning production for BYU, but you also want to see BYU, much like Kevin Young proclaimed, he wants to make BYU an NBA factory. I know that Kalani Sitake has not been maybe that pointed about wanting BYU football to be that, but he's made it very clear that if guys want to go and play at the NFL level, he is all for it. He will do everything within his power to support these young men in pursuing that dream. Yes, I think the BYU needs to keep developing guys and hope that at some point the tide turns a little bit and they start to hear more and more names drafted from BYU. But the bigger, I think, issue at hand is the guys who did not get drafted this year, the 8 guys here that are obviously looking at their professional opportunities, go and make good on the opportunity you've been given, whether it's at a mini camp or whether as an undrafted free agent. The odds are stacked against you. It's just the simple fact of what the NFL stands for. It is a business more so than anybody would care to admit. They are cutthroat, and they want nothing more than essentially prove themselves in their mind. Speaking of the evaluators, the front office executives, etc., they want nothing more than to feel justified in saying, yeah, that's why we didn't take that guy in the draft, and that's why he's going to be told, hey, bring your playbook up to the GM's office. A lot of guys have succeeded from BYU in recent years. We've seen a lot of really, really good draft picks and even guys who didn't get drafted who have been able to hang on in the NFL. And I hope that we have a handful of those guys come from this crop. But going forward, yeah, it would be nice to see BYU start to have guys hear their names called. Next year, it's in Pittsburgh, I believe, where the draft is. You want to hear their name called. You want to see them celebrating with their family and friends. But then beyond that, they need to go out there and prove that, yes, BYU prepared them for the NFL. It doesn't do BYU any good to have guys who flame out in the NFL. Actually, it's a detriment when guys go to the league from your program don't do well. It actually makes NFL teams less likely to pick your guys in future drafts when they say, okay, last time we took a guy from BYU, they didn't really do much for us. And that's something you have to balance here, speaking of BYU. But I think the nice part is all 8 of these guys were big contributors to BYU's success last year. And now the guys who are at BYU right now who were part of that success last year have to pick up the baton and carry it forward here and improve upon it. I think BYU's got multiple draft picks in next year's team. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe by the time the draft comes around next year, we're doing this old song and dance on this podcast where I'm trying to opine about the fact that BYU should have more draft picks. But until they can prove themselves capable of consistently producing NFL talent, yeah, you're going to see more and more guys maybe not hear their name called over the 3 days the draft's going on, but then you hear their name in terms of the reports they've signed a UDFA. It's called an undrafted free agent contract with a team shortly after the draft concludes. But I really do think that Kalani Sitake is doing his absolute darndest to build up what is an NFL factory, but at the same time, he's not going to do that at the detriment of losing at the collegiate level and being a competitive program for BYU at the Power 4 level, just so he can get guys into the NFL. He has proven he can get guys there. We can look at Zach Wilson. We can look at Jaron Hall as the quarterbacks who have been taken in the NFL draft. We also can look at offensive linemen like Brady Christensen. You can look at Kingsley Suamataia, who is going to go to the interior of Kansas City's offensive line this year, even though he was drafted as an offensive tackle. They have had a lot of guys drafted in recent years, and the hope is over time, the production and the reputation that BYU has, it has a better and better connotation to it when it comes to the NFL draft. There were long stretches that BYU was not an NFL destination, but now I think it is going to become that more and more, especially if BYU remains hyper competitive in the Big 12 conference. That'll be a big part of it, because if you can prove you can be competitive at that level, NFL teams will say, okay, yeah, they are proving themselves at the highest level of college football. We need to give these guys a little extra look when it comes to our evaluations. All right, so there you go. That's what I got for you guys as we look back at the draft that was. But coming up this week, we are looking at what's going on for BYU, both in football and basketball, what the futures hold for both of these programs, but also some other sports out there. There's one in particular that I am worried is being just completely overlooked by the BYU athletic administration. I'd like to be wrong, but I don't think I am. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. That's what they call a tease in the business. Make sure you guys come back tomorrow to this here podcast. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars a part of your day. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day, in fact. And as always, thank you for being everydayers with us here. And make sure you subscribe, rate, review, share with your family and friends. Make sure everybody knows about the Locked On Cougars podcast.